Hello my crochet friends, this is Sarah from Ned and Mimi, and in this video we are going to crochet a pair of cozy wrist warmers. So these mittens are actually really easy because there is no shaping involved at all you need to do is make a rectangle and then do some really easy seaming at the end. And the best part is the left and right mittens are identical, so once you make one, all you need to do is repeat the same steps for the other one. So to make this project you are going to need the written crochet pattern, and I have written that for 7 different sizes from toddler up to adult extra large. So the amount of yarn that you will need and your stitch and row counts will all depend on the size that you are making, and you can find all of those details in the written pattern. So do grab that before you start. So before we get started, let's take a quick look at the materials that we are going to need. So for these mittens, you will need a DK weight yarn. So that's a weight 3 yarn. And I am using Alpaca Cloud DK from WeCrochet. And this is a 100% baby alpaca yarn, and it is beautifully soft. So the size that you are making will determine the amount of yarn that you need. So do check the pattern for that before you get started. In terms of crochet hook, you will need a 4.5mm crochet hook, but of course if you do tend to crochet a little more tightly or a little more loosely than the gauge given in the pattern, you might need to use a different hook size, and that is completely fine. And finally you will need a yarn needle for some seaming and weaving in your ends. And now without further ado, let's get started. So today I am going to make the matching mitten for this child size here, and the good news is that both mittens are identical, so once you could make one you could easily make the other. So before we start, I'm just going to give you a quick run through of what we're going to do. So we're going to start down here with our ribbing, and that's going to be worked in a long strip. Next we will start crocheting the body of the mitten up along here, and this is just going to be even rows, no increasing or decreasing, just all the way along. Then we will fold the mitten in half like we have done here, seam along the top here and also along the bottom, leaving some space for the thumb. And then finally we'll just finish off the thumb with a round of single crochet and a round of slip stitches just to make that edge nice and neat. So let's go ahead now and make the second mitten. Okay, so let's get started on the ribbing. So we are going to begin with a slip knot. And for the size that I am making here, I am going to chain 9. All right, so now I'm going to start working into the second chain from the hook. So skipping this first chain here, and I'm going to slip stitch into the second chain. So I'll insert my hook, the yarn over and pull up a loop, and then just continue to pull through for the slip stitch. And I'll just repeat that all the way along the chain. So my tip here is to keep your slip stitches as loose as you possibly can, because this is going to make the subsequent rows much easier. And if you find that your slip stitches are very tight, you might even want to go up a hook size just for the ribbing. But for me, I find that just keeping my tension loose and using this hook worked out really well. So there we go. That is the first row done. So we can go straight into the second row now, and it is going to be another row of slip stitches. So we'll chain 1 and turn, and that chain does not count as a stitch. And now I'm going to slip stitch across the previous row, but working through the back loop only. So I'm just going to grab my yarn needle just to show you this back loop. So there it is, right there. You might have to rotate your work around a little bit to see it. So there's the front loop, and there's the back, and that's the one that we are going to work into. So away we go into that back loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then continue to pull through for the slip stitches. Now as you go along the row, you might find that it's easier to try and do the slip stitch in one movement like this. So you'll insert your hook, yarn over and pull through both loops all in one single movement, and I do find this to be much easier. And again, just trying to keep that tension a little bit loose if you can. So we'll just slip stitch through the back loop, all the way along, and do keep an eye on your stitch count as well here for the ribbing. So at the start of this ribbing I chained 9, which means I have 8 stitches in each row because I skipped that very first chain. So there we go, that is row 2. So it's not looking like much is happening at the moment, but as you go along you are going to see this lovely knit look ribbing form. So I'm just going to work a few more rows. So we're just going to repeat that row 2, slip stitching through the back loop all the way along, and then you'll have a much better idea of how it's going to look. Now, one other tip I'm also going to give you here is to try and choose a hook that has quite a pointy tip, because it's going to be easier to get it through that back loop and pick up those slip stitches. So if you have a hook with a very blunt tip, you might find that that is much trickier, and this has definitely been my experience anyway. Alright, so I've just worked a few more rows of the ribbing, and now you can see exactly what it's going to look like. So we have these lovely knit look rows here, and it's quite stretchy as well. So I'm going to go ahead now and work the remaining rows for the size that I am making. So I need to do a total of 27 rows. So I will go ahead and do that, and then I will see you back here very, very shortly to get started on the body of the mitten. Okay, so I have finished my ribbing. So these are my 27 rows, and I'm just going to give you a tip for counting rows with this stitch pattern because it can be a little bit tricky. So if you lay your ribbing flat and just keep the tail to the top here, and then just count in pairs. So we'll go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26. Now, if I was to finish down here in this corner, so opposite the starting chain, I would have an even number of rows. And then if I finish up here at the same point as the starting chain, I have an odd number. So that's how I know that I have worked 27 rows here. So I know the ribbing might seem like it is really, really narrow, and you might be thinking there is no way that is going to go around a hand, but I promise it is super, super stretchy. And actually what it's going to give us is a really nice snug fit around the wrist here, but without having to do any shaping. So no increasing or decreasing or anything, just a nice stretchy ribbing. So we can go straight into the body of the mitten now. So we're going to work the first row of the body all along this top edge here. So to begin, we are going to chain 3. So this first row is going to be a row of linked treble crochets. So this might be a new stitch to you, but I think you are really, really going to like it. So to do our first linked treble, we're going to skip the first chain from the hook, insert our hook into the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, then insert our hook into the third chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. So keeping all of those loops on the hook. And now what we're going to do is just go into the side of this last ribbing row here. So I'm just going to go right in there, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now I have 4 loops on my hook, and I'm just going to work them off 2 at a time. So I'll yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2, and then do that one more time. And that is our first stitch done. So you can see it's quite a tall stitch, so it's about the height of a treble crochet, which is why it's called a linked treble. And we can just continue working these stitches all the way along the row. So let's do the next one. So if you rotate your work a little bit here, you'll see that we have these vertical bars where we pulled up the loops in the previous stitch. So we'll insert our hook under the first vertical bar and pull up a loop, insert it under the next and pull up a loop. And now again, we need to join to the ribbing. So we're going to insert our hook into the side of the next ribbing row. So I know this can be a little bit tricky, and this probably is the hardest row of the entire piece. So once you have this done, I promise things are going to get much easier. So I'm just going to go right into the middle of this last slip stitch here, and then yarn over and pull up a loop. So that's the last leg of our linked treble. So then we'll just work those loops off 2 at a time again. And that is our second stitch done. So I just need to keep working those stitches all the way along the row, and always the last leg is going to be joined in to the row of ribbing. So let's do one more. So pulling up a loop, that first vertical bar, and then in the second, and then finally into the next row of ribbing. So each time that you're joining into the ribbing, you'll notice that you're going to be joining into this knit look row here, or into this kind of inset section here, which has a corresponding knit look row on the back. So this is definitely more of an art than a science. So just do your best when you are joining in and find the most logical place to place you. And find the most logical position to insert your hook, and then just go with that. So there's no hard and fast rules, just work it as neatly as you can all the way along the row. So you want to work one stitch for each row of ribbing. So in this row you should have a total of 12 stitches once you get to the end. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue working all the way along, and I will see you at the end of the row. Alrighty, so I have finished my first row, and you can see already how working into each row of the ribbing has caused it to stretch out a little bit, and now this first row is much wider than our original ribbing was. So do have a quick look at your stitch count and make sure that you have the correct number of stitches in this row, because it can be easy to miss working into one of these ribbing rows, and you do need a stitch for every row. So that's the most tricky row complete. So let's go straight into row 2 now. So this is also going to be a row of linked stitches, but this time we are going to work a row of linked double crochets. So to start, we're going to chain 2. So keep those chains a little bit loose if you can, and then turn our work. And now, as we did with the treble crochets, we're going to be picking up loops in our starting chain. So I'm going to insert my hook under the second chain from the hook here, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now I need to join to the top of the next row. So I'm just going to insert my hook under both loops there of that first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then work off those loops 2 at a time. And that's it. Let's go ahead and work the rest of the row. So we'll insert our hook under that vertical bar, just as we did for the linked treble crochets, and pull up a loop. This time we only have one vertical bar. Then we'll insert our hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, and work the loops off. And that's all there is to this row. So we're just going to continue repeating that all the way along. So just always into the vertical bar and then into the next stitch and working the loops off. So I will go ahead and do that now, and I'll see you back here at the end of the row. Okay, so I have finished row 2, and now we're ready to go straight onto row 3. And the good news is that row 3 is going to be a row of linked treble crochets, just as we did at the first row here, but it's going to be a little bit easier this time because we don't have the ribbing to contend with. So just as a recap, to begin our linked treble crochets, we're going to chain 3 loosely, turn our work, and then pull up a loop in each of the second and third chains from the hook. So inserting our hook into that second chain, and pull up a loop, insert it into the third chain. So this can be a little bit tricky sometimes, and pull up a loop, and then finally inserting it into the top of the first stitch and pull up a loop, and then just work our loops off 2 at a time. So let's do the next one. Under the first vertical bar, under the second vertical bar, join in to the next stitch, and then work them off 2 at a time. And that's it. So for row 3, that's all I need to do is continue to work those linked treble crochets all the way along. And that's actually everything you need to know to be able to crochet the body of this mitten. So we're just going to repeat those 2 rows, the linked trebles and the linked doubles, for a total of 8 rows for the size that I am making. But do check the pattern to see how many rows you need to work for your particular size. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I will see you back here when I have finished all of my body rows, and then we will just get to some seaming and creating the thumb opening. So see you back here very, very shortly. Okay, so we are back and I have finished working the body of this little wrist warmer. So there's one more row that I'm going to do, and that's just going to be a row of slip stitches across the top here, and that's just going to give us a nice neat edge along here. So what we're looking at is the right side of our work. So anywhere where we have the rows of linked trebles, so these rows here, that is going to be the right side. So I'll just go ahead and do the row of slip stitches now. So I'll chain 1 and then just slip stitch through both loops all the way along the row. Okay, so that's the row of slip stitches done. So now I'm going to fasten off, and I'm going to leave a nice long tail. So it doesn't have to be crazy long, but just long enough that you can do the first part of the seam. So let's just pull that through. And now we're ready to start seaming. So we're going to fold the mitten in half. Now I'm going to seam on the wrong side, so this is the back of the mitten, using the whip stitch method. But there are other seaming methods like the mattress stitch, for example, which you would do on the right side, so choose whichever method you prefer. Now before we seam, I'm just going to grab a couple of stitch markers and just mark out where our seams are going to be. So for this particular size, I'm going to allow about 1.5 inches at the top here. So I'll just pop my stitch marker into the end of that row, and then the same place on the opposite side. There we go. And then I'm also going to leave about 1.5 inches for the thumb opening. So let's just measure that out as well. So I'm going to pop my stitch marker in here, and then also through the same point on the other side. Okay. So we're going to seam from the top down to this first marker, and then from the bottom up to this marker, and we leave this bit unworked for the thumb. So let's go ahead with the seam. So I'm just going to use a very simple whip stitch seam. Alrighty, so we're just going to go through this edge and then also the opposite one. And I like to just do a double stitch there at the start to make sure that it's not going anywhere. So I like to go right through the center of these stitches. Alright, so let's just check that measurement again. I think it should be okay. So yep, that is just about 1.5 inches, so I'm happy with that. So now we'll just do a few extra stitches in that last point just to make sure that it is not going anywhere. And now we can just weave in this end. So let's just fasten off there. All right, so that is the first part of the seam done. So now we just need to join in a strand of yarn down here. And I think this one should be long enough, so let's go ahead and use that. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing. So seaming from the bottom up to this second stitch marker. Alrighty, so that is my second seam done. Now I'm just going to leave these tails for now because, as you can see, sometimes when we are seaming we can just end up with these little small gaps here, and I'm going to review those later and then possibly use the tails to close them up, so we leave them there for now. So I'm just going to flip the mitten the right way around, and it's already looking really good, so I'm really happy with that. And I just love how we get this effect of shaping from the slip stitch ribbing and then the even rows, and it looks like we have deliberately done this shaping, but we haven't. It's just a simple rectangle. So now on to the thumb opening. So if you wish, you can just leave it like that. However, I feel that this edge is just a little bit untidy, and I would like to just work a couple of rounds around here to make it look a little bit neater. So on the right side, we're just going to grab our yarn again and just join in anywhere here along this seam line. So I'm just going to insert my hook here, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then I'll chain one. And now I'm just going to single crochet really evenly all around the edge of the thumb opening. So let me just pop that tail in there, and we'll weave that in later. Now you don't need to be too concerned about the number of stitches that you have in this round. I have suggested or approximate stitch counts in the pattern, so you can check those, but honestly just work as evenly as you can. You will be working approximately 3 single crochets for each row of the linked trebles and then 2 for the linked doubles, but honestly don't worry too much about it, just go nice and neatly. And of course do take note how many stitches you have for the thumb opening in your first mitten, because you're going to want to achieve that for the second one as well. So I'm just going to continue all the way around here. So you might want to add one just at that seam line too. We'll just keep going all the way around. Okay, so here we are back to the start. I don't think I'm going to squeeze another one in. So this is already looking nice and neat, but I'm just going to finish off with a round of slip stitches. So you don't need to join at the end of this round. We're just going to go straight into this first stitch here with a slip stitch. So there we go. And I'm actually just going to grab my marker and just mark that slip stitch, just because it's going to make finishing off the round a little bit easier. Sometimes it can be hard to know which was actually the first slip stitch. So away I go, slip stitching all the way around. Alrighty, so I'm almost back at the start. Now I know this is a little bit tricky to see, but I basically have one more slip stitch left to work into this final stitch here. However, I'm going to finish off with an invisible join. So this is my favorite way to finish off slip stitches worked in the round. So I'll just show you how to do that now. And of course, if you don't want to do this, you can just slip stitch in the last one and then slip stitch to join to the first as well. That's absolutely fine. So for the invisible join, I'm going to cut my yarn and just pull it all the way through. Then I'm going to thread my yarn needle like so. And now we are going to skip over that last stitch that needs to be worked and insert our yarn needle from bottom to top through that very first slip stitch. There we go. So we're going to create kind of a false stitch over this skipped one here. And then I'm going to go back through the center of that last slip stitch. So right through the middle and all the way out the back. And then if we pull that not too tightly, you can see that we have this invisible join here. So that's kind of our false stitch. And then all I need to do is just weave this end in. So let me just pop that on the inside for now. And we can have a look at what we have done. So there is our little wrist warmer. So I'm so happy with how this has turned out. I absolutely love the texture of these stitches. I really like this ribbing and I love how we have finished off the thumb opening there. So now all that's left to do is just turn it inside out and weave in our ends. And as I said, if you do find that you have any little gaps here that you're not happy with, just use the tails on the inside to close those up. So there we go. And there we have it, we're all done. So I really hope you have enjoyed making these cozy wrist warmers with me, and I do have lots more free patterns and tutorials on my website nedandmimi.com, so be sure to check those out. Happy crocheting and take care.